Welcome back, guys. Today we are going to talk about positioning in CSS. Let's go. Okay, first we look at how the static position works in CSS. Static is the default position in CSS, so all your elements are by default static. And this is one of the examples. Now we have a bunch of divs, which one containing the other. We have inside a body, we have C1, we have C2, and then we have two squares, which is square 1 and square 2. On the right hand side, you can see I have put all the colors and padding to just make it more clear in this example. My style is here. And this is how the default flow layout works. What it means is that very straightforward, right? Square 1 now is taking that much of the space because I have set the height to 70 pixels here on the right hand side. So now it's taking 70 pixels of height and 70 pixels of width. And since square 2 is the element after square 1, so it has to render after the space that square 1 being taken, which is now is below square 1. Very straightforward. And look at C2. Because square 1 and square 2 are the children of C2, so C2 has to contain both squares. So that's why it has a bigger size with the padding. And one more thing you may want to know is that sometimes you want to verify what kind of position this element is using. What you can do is that on Firefox, you can right click anywhere and then you click on inspect element. Now I'm selecting the div of the square 1 here. And on the right hand side in the compute tab, you click browser styles. You type in position. Now you can see that we are using static position. This is how you can confirm what kind of position you're using for the element. And now let's look at the position absolute. Okay, come back to our previous example. Now everything is static, one after the other. What if on square 1, I make it absolute? And I put the top is 0 and left is 0. Like this. Okay, now as you can see, square 1 is out of the flow layout. There are two things you have to understand here. First of all, look at square 2. Square 2 doesn't reserve any space for square 1. Okay, so now it's got rendered right after the C2 span here. And second thing is that now your square 1 is out and it being positioned relative to body. Okay, no longer C2. It was positioned relative to C2. Just like now square 2 is positioned relative to C2, but now it's just out and to body. So why is it being positioned to body? That's because for absolute element, you will look up on your parent. You will look for your closest parent that which has position relative, and then you will be positioned to that. And if you can't find any element that is positioned in relative, you will be looking to the root of your element, which is your body. Okay, that's why now it's on body. And you can use the top and left to adjust the position of square 1. So for example, now I put left is 100 pixel. Now it's still positioned relative to body, but now it's give left margin of 100 pixel right here. So that's why it's rendered here. So the positioning is still relative to body, but you can use the other parameters like top, left, and bottom and right to adjust it to appear anywhere on the screen, anywhere on the element, I should say, not the screen. Okay, and what we want to do here is, what if we want to make it position to C1 instead of body? On C1, we can do position relative. Okay, now because it found a parent that is relative, so it positioned relative to C1. That's how it works. And C2 is a closer parent than C1. If we make C2 to be relative, now square 1 is position relative to C2. Okay, this is how you use relative and absolute all together. And the next question is, why are we going to need this? How are we going to use this in a real life scenario? I'm going to show you two examples. Okay, so the first example we are going to look at is sales tag. Right here we have two grid. First one is $1,000, second one is $5,000. They're same size, but first one we want to put a sales tag somewhere. All right, but of course, as you can see now, this is not looking good because what we want is we want this first $1,000 to be vertically aligned with the second $5,000. They should be on the same line vertically. And so how we are going to do this is now we go to the style. This is a tag. This is the red color one, the sales tag. And what we put is, let's do a position absolute. Okay, now sales tag is absolute and is being positioned relative to body, which is not something that we want because we want it to be contained inside this grid, right? So in the grid, we use a relative. Okay, so now your $1,000 and $5,000 are being vertically aligned on the same level because your sales tag on the first grid is just out of your full layout, so it doesn't take any space when the 1,000 div is being rendered. And this is one of the class example you can use. For example, you may not want it to be on the top left. Maybe you just bottom sometimes, bottom right. So you can just play around like this. It works. And you may even want to have the other sales tag on the $5,000, and that will still work. Now, because your second sales tag here is positioned to your second grid, not the first grid, because both of your grid are relative, right? So your sales tag here is looking for the closest parent that is relative. So your second sales tag found the 5,000 grid to be relative, and your first sales tag found $1,000 to be relative. So they both are just in different scope. If you don't do that, that would be very messy. For example, you on your grid you don't do a relative. Oh, where's it? Oh, okay, now it's in the top bottom. You can't see because my face is blocking it. Let me change it back to top left here. Okay, now you only see one sales tag. Why is that? Because both of the sales tag are being rendered on the same position. Okay, they are all on the top left, so you only see one, but actually there are two, and that's things are messed up. So relative is very important when you use absolute. That's how you control where your element should be positioned to. In this example, we are going to look at how to put a caption on the image. So now we have image of tiger, and we got caption called lovely tiger, which is a div on top of the image. But sometimes you may not want to do that. You may want to just put this div to be overlay on the image instead of taking any extra space, especially when you have multiple images all together which are the same size. You just want a very nice little tag on overlay on the image. All right, now we go to our CSS, and same thing here. We have a tag. So position absolute. Let's say this time I want it to be bottom right. All right, and our grid here we put relative. Okay, now lovely tiger is on the bottom right, overlay on top of your image, not taking any extra space. Okay, and a very common scenario for this is you want to put a border radius, let's say 4 pixels, something like that, just to give it a little bit curve to the grid. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. All right, this is the second example. So the next one we look at is fixed position. Fixed position means that your element is always fixed on the user visible area. What it means is that you will always see on the screen. For example, here we have a menu 1. Menu 1 we set it as fixed already, and no matter how you scroll it, is always on top. This may not be clear, but let me try to add something. Let's say, let me add 3000 div, like this. All right. Okay, so now, if you look at the style here, I have set the height of the body to be 8000 pixels just to make sure that this page is long enough for us to see this example. Now we have a scroll bar on the right. Now you can see that when I'm scrolling, all the div are just scrolling down, right? But my menu one is stick on the top, okay? And this is also one of the example of using fixed for menu. So most of the time you may want, a lot of time you may want your menu to be always on top of the page. So no matter how they score it, they can still see your menu. This is how you can do it. Very simple. Just put here, you put a position fix and top is 0 pixel. Then your menu will always be on top. And one more example I want to show you is sometimes you want to put a little chat icon on the bottom right of your page. So here let's add a bottom icon div which contains an image of WhatsApp logo. Let's see. All right. Now it's being rendered right here because now it's static by default. So I didn't do any CSS yet. So it's static by default. So following to the full layout model, that's how it's being rendered. And next, okay, bottom icon. Let's do this. Oh, I select it already. And bottom icon, let's put position fixed, and bottom is 0, right is 0. Okay, now let's go to the top bottom. But it's very big, right? It doesn't look good. So just change the width of the image. Let's say 30 pixels. Cool. Now it's looking good on the bottom right of your page, and no matter how you score it, now you can see I keep scoring and my content keeps changing, which is expected, but my menu and my bottom right icon just stay right there. All right, this is how you do fixed position. Okay, now we look at how to use the relative position alone. Honestly, I don't think you need to know this because I never got a chance of using it in real life, but it's just good to know how it looks like, and just maybe just keep in mind there's such a thing. Okay, now we go back to our original example, which what we show on the static. And let's say square one here, we put it to be relative. And let's say I set the top to be 0 and left to be 0. It doesn't change anything, right? Okay, what if I put left to 100? Okay, now it got changed. Maybe I just also put top to be 5. Like this. Okay, now it's kind of overlay on top of square 2 to make it more obvious. I want to make it obvious that now the square 2, now how the square 2 being positioned and allocated space is not relevant to where square 1 is right now, but it tries to pretend that square 1 is still rendered in the original page. So when you're applying a relative or not on square 1, your position on square 2 doesn't change at all, but your square 1 change. Okay, so that's the difference of relative. So your full model is still preserving the space for square 1, although your square 1 is already rendered somewhere else. Okay, now square 1 is rendered. Now square 1 is still positioned to relative to C2, but because of the top and left, so it got rendered in a different position. But its original space is preserved. That's how relative works. Okay, the last position we're going to talk about is sticky. Now go back to our original example. Let's make square 1 to be sticky. Sticky, and top is 0 pixel. Now I save it, nothing happened. Okay, because square 1 is not on top 0 yet, so nothing happened. How do I make it to top 0? Okay, what I can do is I put a height on body so that I got a scroll bar. Now I can scroll down and okay. Now you see that. Okay. Now when I scroll down to top 0 for square 1, square 1 will stick there. It won't go away. It just stick in top 0 pixel. This is how sticky works. Alright. And you can see now it's overlay on top of square 2. Okay, but the second thing you need to be careful is that now it's gone. Now when I scroll down to when the whole C2, okay, this is C2, all right, because now square 1 is still positioned relative to C2 instead of your user page view, which is different than fixed. For fixed, it's always stay there, but sticky, it just, you are still positioned on the same element, but it just becomes sticky when you reach to that attribute. In our case, it's top 0, okay? But once your whole C2 element is gone out of the view, your sticky element will be gone too, okay? Not such an exception. So it's still positioned relative to C2, not on the page, not on the body, all right? Only difference is that when it's go to a certain level, it just stick there, all right? I have never used this in my life, so I don't think you really need to know too much about it, but just good to remember that there's such a thing. The most important positioning you need to know is static and fixed. That's very useful. Okay, that's it. That's all the CSS position stuff that you need to know. If you have any question, leave a comment below and make sure you have liked and subscribed. I see you guys next time.